Alrighty, as always, this is MTG Anonymous. Welcome to the video. So today we are going to cover a deck that's part Swarm, part Combo, part Eldrazi, and all mill. As you know, I always include Altar the Brood in my deck, so this deck is called Brood and Bloom. This deck is where we turn tiny tokens into a mill machine, ramp into a giant threat like Ulamog the Ceaseless Hunger, and if you like combo decks that also smash face, this one's the one for you. So let's dive straight into the video. As you know, as always, I read each one of the cards that are important to the deck, which every single card in this deck is super important, so let's go over them first. Alter the Brood, my favorite card. For one, it's an artifact. Whenever another permanent you control enters, each opponent mills a card. So this is super important. If we're able to get an untapped land, we want to play this on turn 1. Animation module, for one, whenever one or more +1/+1 counters are put on to a permanent you control, you may pay 1. If you do, create a 1/1 colorless serval artifact creature token. And then for 3 and tap, choose a counter on target permanent or player. Give that permanent or player another counter of that kind. The reason this is here is just in case we stall in the combo, we're able to use the ability to make another type of token, which can then hopefully start the spin all over again. So here's the first part of this combo, Basking Brood Scale. For 1 and a green, it's an Eldrazi Lizard, 2/2. It's devoid, meaning it's colorless. And then for 1 in green, it has Adapt. Adapt says if this creature has no +1/+1 counters on it, put that many that are after the Adapt, that many counters on it. Whenever 1 or more +1/+1 counters are put onto this creature, you may create a 0/1 colorless Eldrazi spawn creature token with sacrifice this token and add colorless. So without this card, most of the deck doesn't function. So we have to make sure that we get this out as early as possible. And then as we put +1/+1 counters on it with different things like animation module or one of the cards we'll go over in a second, then we'll keep making Eldrazi spawns, which will then allow us to use the other colorless cards in the deck. Idol of the False God, this is just kind of sprinkled in here. Basking Brood Scale makes us our Eldrazi spawns. So once we have one from there, then we can use this, and then we can start putting +1/+1 counters on this artifact as well. So for 2, Kindred Artifact, it's an Eldrazi. For 1 in colorless, tap, create a 0/1 colorless Eldrazi spawn creature token with sacrifice this token, add colorless. Whenever another Eldrazi you control dies, put a +1/+1 counter on this artifact, which includes those spawns it will make. As long as this artifact has 8 or more +1/+1 counters on it, it has 0/0 it becomes a 0/0 creature in addition to its other types, and it has Annihilator 2. So Annihilator 2 says whenever it attacks, the defending player must sacrifice 2 permanents. That Heralds the End is another very important card in this deck. For 1 and a colorless, it's a 2/2 Eldrazi drone. Colorless spells you cast with mana 7 or greater cost 1 less to cast, and then other colorless creatures you control get +1/+1. So since Basking Brood Scale can make a lot of tokens, if we don't have Altar the Brood out, That Heralds the End will help us out, because every single time we put a +1/+1 counter on the Basking Brood Scale, we'll get a colorless 0/1 token, so then they become 1/2s. And if we get enough of them, we will just swing at our opponent. Kozilek's Command is another finisher in this deck. So for X colorless, it is a instant Eldrazi, choose 2. Target player creates X 0/1 colorless Eldrazi spawn creature tokens where with sacrifice this token and add a colorless. Target player scries X, then draws a card. Exile target creature with mana value X or less, and then exile up to X target cards from graveyards. A trick you can do with this card is, 1, make as many Eldrazi spawn as you have in your cards you have in your deck. Use this ability, so make that many Eldrazi spawns, then scry that many cards and draw a card. Now look for another Kozilek's Command, do the same thing again, this time exiling anything that's in your way, and then do it again. So you can do this 4 times in a row. So obviously this makes this very powerful. If for some reason it takes a little longer than you thought it would, you can use this ability in your deck. So the other half of the combo is Rosy Cotton of South Lane. If you saw my short, then you know what this does. But it's a 1/1 halfling peasant for 2 and a white. When she enters, create a food token. And then whenever you create a token, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control other than Rosy. So what does that mean? So every time Basking Broodscale makes a token, because it gets the +1/+1 counter, now Rosie creates another +1/+1 counter, which you put on Basking Broodscale, which then makes another token, and you just continuously do that until either Basking Broodscale has enough damage to kill your opponent outright, or you have enough tokens to where you can play your entire deck out. Kodama of the West Tree for 2 and a green. It's a legendary creature spirit with reach. Modified creatures you control have trample. A modified creature either has counters, has an equipment attached, or an aura. So this is in here for in case late game Basking Broodscale isn't able to just hit our opponent and kill them. We can instead go over them with a tall Basking Broodscale. And then whenever a modified creature you control deals combat damage to a player, search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield, tapped, then shuffle. So what happens is, if we for some reason want to put multiple cards, every single time a modified creature, so Basking Broodscale with its +1/+1 counters, or it that heralds, if we put +1/+1 counter on it, anytime one of those things hit our opponent, then we immediately get to search for a basic land. We have 19 of them in the deck, so if we hit 19 times, we'll just continuously grab lands. Glaring Fleshraker for 2 and a colorless. It's an Eldrazi drone, 2/2. Whenever you cast a colorless spell, create a 0/1 colorless Eldrazi spawn creature token with sacrifice this, add a token. Colorless mana. Whenever another colorless creature you control enters, this creature deals 1 damage to each opponent. So this is another card. So if we don't have Alter the Brood or it that heralds the end, then this card can also help us end the game. So every time we put a +1/+1 counter on Basking Broodscale with Rosie, it makes the token. That's a colorless creature entering, so this deals 1 damage to an opponent, and we just keep doing that over and over again. Realmbreaker, the Invasion Tree. This is just in here so we can get lands in case it takes us a little longer than you expect. So for 3, it's a legendary artifact. With 2, you tap it, target opponent mills 3 cards. We can put a land card from the graveyard onto the battlefield in our control, but if that land leaves the battlefield, then we exile it. And then for 10, tap, sacrifice it, search your library for any number of Praetor cards, put them on the battlefield, then shuffle. We have no Praetors, so that doesn't really matter, but if we were to tweak the deck around a little bit, we could take some of the things out, like That Heralds the End or the Kodama of the West Tree, throw some Praetors in, because the Praetors do a lot, kind of like Elish Norn, the original one, gives +2/+2 to anything. So that would be an ability we could use as well. Path of Annihilation for 3 and a green is devoid. When this enchantment enters, create 2/0/1 colorless Eldrazi spawn creature tokens. You know what these tokens do by now, because I've read it 6 times. Eldrazi's you control have tap, add 1 mana of any color, and then whenever you cast a creature spell with mana 7 or greater, you gain 4 life. The bottom half of this card you can pretty much ignore. What we want are the 2 colorless Eldrazi spawns, just in case somehow we weren't able to get one any other way of the lower mana costs. Conduit of the Worlds for 2 green is an artifact. You may play lands from your graveyard. Tap, choose target non-land permanent card in your graveyard. If you haven't cast a spell this turn, you may cast that card. If you do, you can't cast additional spells this turn. Why do I have this in the deck? Just in case somehow we've already gotten rid of all of our Basking Broodscales, we can use this ability to grab Basking Broodscale out. Same thing with Rosie, if somehow we're not able to grab her. So basically, we do this, we bring one of them back, and now we can start the combo over. Our opponents typically want to kill this as soon as it comes out, but if they don't, then we can pretty much start the game over right there. And then lastly, Ulamog, the Ceaseless Hunger for 10. It's in legendary Eldrazi. When you cast this spell, exile 2 target permanents. Again, just like Kozilek's command, we need to remove certain permanents out of the way so that way we're just able to attack with Basking Broodscale. So if somehow they have 2 creatures on the battlefield, we use that, we exile the creatures, and then we swing with Basking Broodscale. And then whenever this does attack, defending player exiles the top 20 cards of their library. If somehow we're doing this, our opponent is going to mill out because Altar of the Brood plus all of the tokens, or simply the Conduit of Worlds, meaning we can grab things back from the graveyard. Yeah. Also, Conduit of Worlds doesn't just grab creatures, it also grabs like any non-land permanent. So it would be able to grab these and allow us to cast them from the graveyard as well. So if we cast one and then cast another, the next turn we'll be able to use Conduit of the Worlds, tap it, and then cast these again. So that means we could ultimately remove 6 things in 2 turns. If somehow we're not able to swing to kill our opponent, something's wrong. Lastly, we have lands. Throw any lands you want that make white and green. The reason I have them like this is literally because I want at least 2 greens. The 2 greens will get me to the point where I can play the Basking Broodscale. You pay the 2. Now you have the Eldrazi token. The Eldrazi token gives me the ability to play something else like the Glaring Freshraker, which now anytime I make a colorless spell, which are these, I get to make more, which then allow me to cast my other abilities. So let's go to the overview. This deck fuses classic token swarming using the Basking Broodscale and Rosy Cotton of South Lane, with a sneaky mill engine using Altar of the Brood to mill our opponents every time a permanent enters. And we're not going to stop there, because if somehow we're not able to mill our opponent, then we will just ramp into huge Eldrazi's, such as Ulamog, the Ceaseless Hunger, or That Heralds the End. So it says that this is large, but really, once we get the +1/+1, it will make it so we can attack long. So I've already gone over the strategies, but we'll go over them again. The mill combo is as follows. Altar of the Brood enters every time a permanent enters the battlefield. We mill. Basking Broodscale creates more tokens every single time we put a +1/+1 counter on it. And then Animation Module can also make a token every time we make a every time we make a Eldrazi spawn. So the way it would go, Eldrazi spawn is created after we put the +1/+1 counter on it. This will trigger seeing it. Then we can pay 1 by sacrificing the Eldrazi spawn token, and now we make a colorless servo. Why would you do that, you ask? Well, that is also a colorless creature, so now we get to do the +1. So that was the mill combo. This token loop mills your opponent with each creature you create, and we can do it really, really, really fast. So now let's talk about our ramp. Rosie gives us free counters and tokens every time she helps another creature enter the battlefield. Because, as I said, every time we make a +1/+1 counter on here, we get to make 1 there, and possibly 1 there, depending on how we have mana. Idol of the False Gods is going to accelerate us a little bit, because every turn we get to make an additional spawn. And then as the Eldrazi's die, we build this up. So this is another way, if Basking Broodscale is taking too long, we can build up Idol of the False Gods as well. And now we have 2 things that can swing. And then Passive Annihilation helps us set up ramp and drop extra lands when paired with token production. And then also Conduit of Worlds allows us to pull lands back from the graveyard just in case our opponent starts blowing them up. And then, like I said, we have Ulamog, the Ceaseless Hunger, That Heralds the End, and Realmbreaker, the Invasion Tree, to help us close out the game. Realmbreaker will help us play additional lands if for some reason we need those. Yeah, that's that's really it. So win condition, mill our opponent out with Altar the Brood, swarm them with tokens, and put a whole bunch of +1/+1 counters on the battlefield, or ramp into massive Eldrazi finishers like Ulamog and swing. Easy day. Strengths and weaknesses. Combo potential with explosive token loops. That's a pro. Multiple win conditions, because we can mill, we can swarm, or we can just kill them with the Ulamog. And then solid ramp and recursion package, because Conduit of Worlds can pull stuff out of our graveyard. Cons, it's super weak to board wipes. If we play this combo at the wrong time, we will lose. Graveyard Hate can slow us down, which that's not really the case. We only really care about graveyards for Conduit of Worlds. So if they have a way to put their lands or their cards back from their graveyard into their deck, then we're kind of screwed. And then Aristocrats on our opponent's side screws us up, because if they can recur from the graveyard, we probably lose. Fast aggro decks aren't really an issue because we can win as early as turn 3. Cool plays to look for when you're playing: obviously Animation Module, Basking, Brood Scale, Rosy Cotton of the South Lane. Put these 3 together, we win the game. Cast Ulamog off Isle of the False Gods and Realm Breaker combo. Well, Realm Breaker is not really a combo, but you know what I mean. And then Mass Milling using Altar of the Brood and any of those other things. So, I had the idea of, once I get to, I'd say, 100 subs, then we'll start actually playing these decks. I'm currently Silver 1, working on Gold, but since all of my decks are kind of silly, they're a little bit difficult. If you'd like to make a copy of this deck, I use MTG Goldfish for all of my brewing, and then load it up here, and then play the decks. Average wins more than 5 out of 10 games, and that's typically when I make a deck tech. So if you like this deck, if you like Eldrazi's, hit that like button, subscribe for more unique deck techs. Tell me what's your favorite mill token combo. This is one of my favorites, and I'm looking for more so I can just continuously play mill, because Altar of the Brood is obviously my favorite card. Anyway, drop that in the comments below. Thank you for watching. I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.